Hello there and good evening, and welcome to our Zoom call for NEU members this evening. We have some accessibility features on this call. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a button that says closed caption. If you press that button, you will be able to press a button that says show subtitles, and that will provide live subtitles of this call. You'll also be able to download a transcript. We also have Sam Riddle and Nikki Evans providing BSL interpretation this evening for those who require it. We also have a team of staff in the background who are supporting this call, so please just put a message in the chat if you need something. We are also live streaming this call on social media, so do be aware if you ask a question, it will be live streamed on social media. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Robin Bevan, the NEU National President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike, and a very big thank you to everybody behind the scenes who helps to support these Zoom calls on behalf of the National Education Union. Tonight, it's not just Mike, whose voice you've heard, but Lawson, Lucy, Sarah, Dave, and Henry. And my personal thanks to them for making sure that we're off on time, that you can all hear us and that you can all see us. Coming up tonight, we've got a real strong line of presentations for you. We're going to be hearing from teachers who work in schools all across the country. We're going to be hearing from Karen in Hounslow, Eamon in Essex, Katie, who works for the AET Academy chain, Ed Squire from United Learning, Jess Edmonds from Leicester, and Pablo Paul Phillips from Waltham Forest. So those are coming up in a little while for you. And they're all going to be talking about one thing. And that's the reason why you've joined this call tonight. The key central message of tonight's call is around seeking to control and exercise autonomy within your workplace over aspects of your workload. Working in education is always demanding. It always places pressures on those of us who are in the classroom or in roles in leadership or in support staff roles. It always does. But there are steps that we can take to make our workload more manageable and as a result maintain that energy, that commitment, that creativity and that empathy that comes from being fresh, healthy and committed to our work. Let me just outline a little bit of the plan for this evening. In a few moments, I'm going to be handing over to Kevin and then Mary, who are going to be giving a bit of an introduction to the issue around directed time, the extent to which leadership in a school can determine the hours that you work within your school or college setting. So they're going to be starting first. That's Kevin and Mary. We've got a short 5-minute film for you, which we think captures many of the key features of the message for tonight's call. Then we're going to be hearing from those various teachers from across the country whose names I mentioned. You may well be able to see them on the screen at the moment by name, but not yet necessarily see their faces. They'll be joining us then. We've also got the ability to do some questions and answers later on in the call. So please do use the chat to say hello to people, post comments if you think they will be helpful, constructive and productive for tonight's call. Please don't add in anything else in the chat that might relate to other issues. We'll deal with anything else on another occasion. So tonight's call is just about enabling people to take action in relation to directed time. If you've got a question, please put it into the Q&A function. And within the Q&A function, the technical team who I've mentioned will look at those questions. We'll use all of them, but some of them we'll use later on to shape our published advice. Some we'll be able to answer specifically tonight. So that's the thread we're going to be doing. Mary and Kevin, then we're going to be having the film, then the individual presentations, followed by a Q&A session on this theme of directed time. We know we've got over 1,000 people signed up for this call. We've got several hundred on here already. We're live streaming as well on Facebook and other social media. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass over to, I think, Kevin, who's starting with us this evening. Kevin, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Robin, and welcome to everyone who's joined the call tonight. We had a call with reps and branch officers on Monday with more than 600 people on that call, and it's great that more than 1,000 people have registered for tonight's call. More people will see it on Facebook in addition to that. Now, Robin said our focus is going going to be on talking about 1265. But I'm just going to say something about COVID, and Mary will say something, GCSE exam assessment and the workload around that. And on COVID, just at the beginning, to say, fingers crossed, we can see light at the end of the tunnel. It could still go wrong, but we know now that vaccination has reached all those 50-year-olds and above, all those who were regarded by the government as being more clinically vulnerable, and now rolling out to 45-year-olds. And as soon as another age group becomes, a vaccination becomes available for another age group, we will email all our members to tell them that. Cases are now down to where they were in September, and we're heading into a period when ventilation is easier. Fingers crossed that that gets us through it. That's what we hope for. We think that there are still things to do on safety and COVID in schools. Vaccination matters. We're glad that the government is still maintaining mask wearing in secondary schools. We think that should continue. We think it's important that in-person staff meetings still aren't happening because they are an easy way to spread the virus. We think that clinically extremely vulnerable people should still be working from home until at least they've had their second dose of the vaccination, because they were vaccinated at the same time as 70-year-olds, indicating a much higher level of vulnerability. So there are still things on safety to do, and we know that you have been working on those things, as well as getting our society through this crisis and helping children come through it. But if we are coming through it, then we want to work with you on ensuring that teachers and other education staff are treated with the respect that they deserve. We know from this crisis how important the work you do is. We know that the government doesn't always understand what's going on in schools, and that's being polite. And we know that they don't always have your welfare at the heart of their concerns, and that's being polite. But the union is here with you, and we want to work with you, all of our members and all of our reps, to try and ensure that teachers and support staff are treated with the respect that they deserve. And we mean respect as professionals. Teachers have a degree and a postgraduate qualification and a huge commitment to the children they teach. Support staff are also highly qualified, and they deserve respect for that. And one of the ways they deserve respect is in having proper discussions about their workload. We're going to say to government, it means having proper accountability processes that respect your professionalism as well. But proper discussions about workload really matters. We want to go into the period after COVID with that. And we want to take with us some of the spirit that we've used during COVID, of the whole union coming together, of us being able to do some of these big Zoom calls, for us to write to head teachers outlining things like we wrote to them, outlining the checklists that we had around safety, for us then to talk with members and reps and to say, look, let's have a proper, respectful conversation at each school level, members, reps, with the head teacher, about how best to organise the school. We were thinking about safety during COVID. We want to think about workload, which is related to safety, mental safety for teachers and support staff in those ways. Now, we're starting today with directed hours in the 1265, which is quite a small place to start. But we have plans to talk about more and more things as certainly at the start of the next school year. But we do want to start on the 1265 and directed hours. And sometimes it's good to start in a defined place with something that we can understand quite easily. And we're going to show you a video in a little while that explains this concept. And we're going to then have some reps that talk the way through it. But you know, hopefully, the basics of this, that if you are a teacher, then your conditions are covered by this document, which used to be produced in printed form and has been online since, I think, 2015 or something. But you can find that document, the School Teachers Pay and Conditions document. That's the cover sheet from the 2020 version. It's updated annually. There'll be a new one for 2021, but it conveys certain rights to you. The right not to be required to work on more than 195 days in a year, for 5 of those at a minimum to be inset days. the right not to be directed by your head teacher to work at specific places, specific times for more than 1,265 hours in a year. Those are rights conveyed on you. There are commensurate responsibilities on head teachers to manage that, to work with unions at the workplace and to manage those hours across the 195 days. And this is an important tool for having a conversation with your head teacher about how workload is managed. It doesn't get anywhere near managing all of workload. But it's good to start at a particular place. And then if there are other questions that come up in your school, we want to support you in raising those with your head teacher as well. Now, having said it's about the 1265, the 195 days, the 1265 hours, then that might sound like we're talking only about school teachers and only not about FE lecturers. Actually, there's much of this that you can take from this. The idea that workload is something that should be discussed, that applies to support staff, to FE lecturers, to staff in independent schools, as well as staff in the state institutions. We are suggesting that in every school, there should be a conversation about the 1265 hours and a directed time calendar. It may be that you already have a directed time calendar in your school, but we know that there are many schools where that practice has dropped away. We would like to see those calendars existing because it implies a conversation. We don't just want them to be directed down by the head teacher, but for there to be a conversation between the head teacher and the staff at the school, mediated often through the rep and the discussions between the rep and the members. We want the discussion about what's in that calendar and how it's distributed through the year. There are opportunities to suggest that there are better ways of doing things which have less workload impact for you. We want to stimulate those conversations. We know that during COVID, this sort of mode of working has paid dividends. We've focused on an issue that matters at the workplace, safety during COVID, workload now. We've asked reps to talk to members. We've asked then for reps to take members' viewpoints to head teachers. And then in almost every branch, we now have a reps WhatsApp group where we can report successes or difficulties and discuss difficulties from school to school in those reps WhatsApp groups. And we think that has really worked for us. And we want you to do that now around the directed hours and the 1265. I'm going to hand over to Mary, who's going to give you some more general background on teacher professionalism, support staff concerns that really matter in how we take this forward.
Thanks, Kevin. And I wanted to just say that you have every right to talk about workload. It is not an unmentionable topic. It's something which should be talked about in schools and taken really seriously. And we've just had the NEU conference, and workload, and excessive workload in particular, was a theme that occurred and reoccurred through many conference motions on pay, on accountability, on organising professionalism in every school and college. And we know that excessive workload is an issue which drives, in particular, teachers from the profession. 1/3 of teachers leave within 5 years, 40% leave within 10 years. And when they're asked, the biggest reason for leaving the profession is I can't manage my own workload. I'm too exhausted. I can't keep on at this pace. I'm too stressed. Now, teachers don't mind working hard. They expect to go into teaching to work hard. They do mind work which they do not think is useful, work that doesn't impact upon the quality of their teaching or help their pupils to learn. And too much of the work that teachers do falls under this category of not being work which they find useful. In the State of Education survey, which the NEU did before the conference, we asked members, we do this survey year on year so we can track members' responses, and we had over 10,000 responding to the survey. 2/3 of the respondents to that survey said their workload was unmanageable or only just manageable. Now, those respondents would be teachers, support staff, and leaders. So all NEU members are saying my workload, 2/3 of them are saying my workload is unmanageable or only just manageable. I can barely keep on top of it. And 2/3 also said their workload had increased since last year. Now, that's probably a large part of that is COVID, but there is further worrying signs, which I'll talk about a bit later. Nearly half the respondents said that they were they were very worried. They were worried very often about the effect of workload on their well-being, and nearly all respondents said they had some worry about the consequence of excessive workload on their well-being. And when asked what could be done to improve well-being, 56% of those who responded to the survey said that the government should listen to the profession, and half said that the government should take the pressure off external accountability. Thinking about education recovery after the pandemic, 85% of respondents to the survey said it was more important to keep workloads at an acceptable level. That was the most important thing to think about coming back after COVID, keeping workload at an acceptable level. And 77% said it was important to reduce the pressure of in-school accountability on members' workloads. So this, workload is a really, really important issue. And Kevin has talked about directed time and about the union's campaign this term for consultation and negotiation at school and college level on directed time. And this is a really important foundational campaign. But that's where we want to begin, but that's not where we want to end, because the other thing we know is that teachers do a massive amount of work outside school, which is not directed time, but which is work done to support, ostensibly to support teaching and learning. So across the OECD, teachers in England teach about the same hours across as other OECD countries, about on average 21.5 hours a week actual class contact time, and that's about the average across the OECD. Where we depart from the average is that teachers in England spend double the amount of time across the OECD average for work outside lessons, on preparing work, on marking students' work. We spend twice as much time as the rest of the OECD, as in the average, at doing that work outside the classroom. And teachers in England feel more stressed than any other country in the OECD about their workload. So 6% of teachers in England say they are hugely stressed by their workload. The average across the OECD is 18%. So as a union, we are questioning hard now, what is it that's happening that makes teachers in England so stressed? Why is it they spend twice as long outside the classroom preparing and marking than teachers in the OECD? And I've said these are not directed time practices. We want to make a start this term on let's get the directed time sorted. And that campaign to really focus on directed time, that will establish in schools and colleges that workload is an issue which must be consulted on, must be negotiated on. And if we can negotiate on directed time this term, then we can start to have those conversations on work which is not directed time, which is required of teachers, but must be reasonable. It says in the school teachers paying conditions document, it should be reasonable, this work. I just want to say something finally about GCSE and A-level marking. And what I want to say is that the NEU is absolutely clear that the extra marking and moderation for to generate GCSE and A-level grades cannot be done on top of all the extra work that you are doing now. And we have issued guidance, which we're going to give out tonight through the chat stream, about the guidance, really good high quality guidance that we've issued about the process of awarding grades at GCSE and A-level. But we are very clear in that guidance that you should work in your departments to map out the time you will need to prepare, to gather, to mark, and to judge evidence of student performance, as well as the time you will need for internal quality assurance in order to moderate those grades within a department, or moderate, say, 10 GCSE English groups, moderate the work across those 10 groups. Try to be as specific as you can be about the time that you will need, and then go in and make that and make your case to your school leader or to your line manager. We've got suggestions about how you might want to get extra time. So, for example, if you're in an English department and there's 11 year groups, whilst you're assessing English work, the work you're doing assessing the other year groups will have to you have to do less assessment of other year groups to make the time for your GCSE and A-level groups. You should try and ensure that you're not got parents' evenings, or you should try and have a compensation for more other areas of directed time whilst you're doing this assessment. You shouldn't be required to assess staff meetings if you've got massive amounts of assessment to do, because this is core, difficult, demanding, and really responsible work. And if schools are going to get teachers to do this well and do it properly, then they've got to give them the time to do this work. It cannot be done on top of everything else. So we have the guidance, we've issued it for that. If you are finding that the workload is excessive because you're being asked to generate these grades and moderate work on top of everything else, then that absolutely is a workload issue. You absolutely have a right to raise that with your school management, and you absolutely have a right to have that addressed. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you, Kevin. And I'm just going to give a little bit of background before we move to the film, which is our next item. And this is just really straightforward, simple stuff. If you were appointed as a teacher in a state school, you probably got a letter that was your appointment letter, and you probably never saw all the conditions that go with it. And that's what Mary and Kevin are talking about. They're talking about the school teacher's pay and conditions document. It's a big document, and in there is an absolute binding condition that teachers may not be directed across the year to work for more than 1,265 hours. And that directed time is the piece that includes teaching in the classroom, attending meetings after school, attending parents' evenings, doing duties, and all of it should be added up to make sure there's no more than 1,265 hours in a year. That's your directed time budget. And then, as Kevin said, it also should be evenly distributed through the year. That's your directed time calendar, when dates are put on to the various events that may be required of you. And that should be even. You shouldn't end up with a staff meeting and a parents' evening in the same week on top of other directed time requirements. One small additional point is that if you're a part-time member of staff, you should get, when you start at the beginning of each year, a very clear indication of how that directed time budget has been adapted to fit your part-time working hours. As well as being your NEU National President this year, I am a serving head teacher, and everything I am telling you now is what I do in my school every single year. And I do it because it's good for the staff and it's good for the school, and it's great when part-time teachers know which meetings in advance they need to attend, which inset days they need to attend, and which ones they aren't coming to, because it's not part of their directed time. And if you're a member of support staff, you too will have specified hours to work in your contract. And those are the hours you should work. And if you're required or asked to attend planning meetings or other kinds of meetings outside those hours, you should be paid for them. And that should be absolutely clear and straightforward in your workplace. So let's go to that film. And after the film, we're going to hear from teachers in a variety of contexts who've done something about this. So let's have the film, if we may, please.
What is directed time, and why is it important? An NEU rep story. Directed time is when teachers are directed by their head teacher to be available for work. This is a maximum of 1,265 hours per academic year and has not been suspended during the COVID-19 pandemic. In a normal year, our union group will meet with our leadership team to negotiate our directed time calendar, as set out in the school's teachers' pay and conditions document. Collectively, we agree how a teacher's work pattern is broken down to achieve an acceptable workload. This year, we will also take into account activities as a result of coronavirus, which will mean checking our current directed time calendar for this year, as well as planning next year's. Workload is now seen as the #1 reason 33% of teachers leave in the first 5 years. Recently, this has intensified as members try to make workplaces as safe as possible. A directed time calendar is a professional standard we should all expect, allowing us to better manage workload and ensure our working time is reasonable. What happens if my school hasn't got a directed time calendar? Step 1. Speak to your rep. If you don't have one, meet with other NEU members and explore directed time with your NEU union group using our Excel pro forma. Step 2. Utilise our meeting PowerPoint. Step 3. Raise directed time with your leadership and governors. You can even use our model letter and directed time resources if that helps. Step 4. Report back to members what your leadership has said. Step 5. Contact your local branch secretary if you need support. What are you doing at your workplace? The NEU's bargaining calendar approach helps reps and members prioritise negotiations with leaders like me on issues from pay to appraisal and working time. If you are working on directed time in your workplace, let us know how you're getting on by dropping us an email.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you again to the technical team for allowing that to flow so smoothly. I'm just going to ask now if we can bring up onto the screen the various teachers who are now going to be giving each of them a short insight into how they responded to issues relating to workload and directed time within the context of their own schools. And we've got a variety of individuals coming onto the screen. Fantastic. And I know that Paul, I don't know if we've got Paul with us. Paul has got another commitment coming up shortly afterwards, so he will probably appear and then disappear as if by magic, and I'll call him in when I get to see him. So I do need to just offer brief apologies on behalf of Carla and Rasheen from Birmingham. They were advertised as being available tonight. They're not available tonight, but we've got other people instead. And I'm going to ask if we can start with Jessica. After Jessica, we're going to go to Karen. Jessica, if you would just take us through, as you have done before, that fabulous 3-minute story of what you did in your workplace. Thank you very much, Jessica, who's based in Leicester. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm a primary rep in Leicester. I started at my school about 5 or 6 years ago, and I wasn't given a directed time breakdown. And we were asked to do things like pupil progress meetings in our PPA time. And all teachers were asked to run a club every term. And I was thinking this just wouldn't add up to 1265. And so I asked other teachers and members of staff, do we have this? No, never heard of it. So I called a meeting for NEU members. We didn't have a rep. And funnily enough, I was elected as the rep. And I took members' concerns to our head teacher that, you know, we felt we were doing more than 1265 and could we have a breakdown of our directed time? And when she did that, she realised it wasn't quite right. And so the problem was solved. And when COVID first came into our lives a year ago, it meant that I could have a really, you know, honest conversation with my head about directed time at that time. Members were quite worried about the move to remote teaching. They'd never done this before. This whole methodology was alien to them, and you know, they weren't familiar with the technology. So the conversation that we had was around additional PPA. So not just giving us the minimum of the 10%, but kind of using our directed time in order to give us that extra time to prepare. And I had altered the school day, so we actually finished our teaching input at 2 p.m. And then we had the remainder of our directed time to plan and prepare. So that equated to 90 minutes of PPA every single day, which I'm sure is every teacher's dream scenario. But I think it just shows that when you come together as a union group and you have that conversation with your head, you really can make a change. And directed time is a really good place to start.
Thank you.
That's everything from me.
Oh, no, thank you very much, Jessica. It's a short story, but it's such a powerful story. And it's got some key features in there that we would want everybody to hear tonight, which is, first of all, you raise the issue with your fellow union members. Then if you haven't got a rep, you agree who will be the rep, or you can have 2 people as the rep. You can do it as a joint thing. Sometimes people find that a little easier. You then open a conversation with the head. Sometimes that can be a little bit nerve-wracking, but you've got to open the conversation in order to begin the dialogue that works you towards your solution. Thank you so very much indeed, Jessica. I'm going to go to Karen next. After Karen, we'll go to Paul, Pablo, who I can see on screen. So we're going to go Karen, then Pablo, then I'll go across to Katie and Edward, just so you know the order I'm going in. Thank you, Karen.
Hi, I'm in an academy secondary school in West London, and in 2019 we had a new head start the school. So when it got to the time to start thinking about timetables for the following year and directed time calendar, I asked to meet him. Now he sent me his calculation before the meeting and I went through it with a fine-tooth comb. Don't know if anyone has been geeky enough to do what I did, which is to look at the fact that 1,295 hours over 195 days, which is the number of days that we need to be in school, equates to just under 6 hours, 40 minutes a day. So I had that in mind when I was looking at his calculations. He had already reduced the number of days that we were teaching. Instead of being 190, it was down as 183 with 5 inset days. So this obviously made me realise that I needed to have a really good look at his figures. He'd done this because he'd extended the length of the school day. So he thought that he'd got the numbers balanced. He hadn't. And as I said on Monday's meeting, never ever assume that your SLT team's maths is better than yours or is correct. I'm a head of modern languages. I'm not a mathematician, but I could work out his numbers weren't right. So when I looked at it, these were the areas where there were issues, incorrect calculations. So the day had been elongated. It equated to 7 hours less 45 minutes lunch, but there was 25 minutes of supervision added in there. So break duty, and then he wanted us around at the end of the school day to make sure the building was cleared, and 5 minutes at the start and end of lunchtime. Those 5 minutes at the start and end of lunchtime had not been included in the calculation. Well, 10 minutes a day, 50 minutes a week, you know, you're already nearly up to an hour. The day was already at 6 hours 40. So we were on the sort of the length of a day as it should be before we even started looking at meetings. So I then went through all of the extra things that should be added in there. He hadn't included open evenings in his calculations. He hadn't included trap time. So trap time being the time between the end of your school day and the start of a meeting. So for example, the parents' evening, open evening, and so on. Hadn't calculated that. We had a bit of a to and fro about whether it should be or not, and he gave in. So that had to be added in. He'd also put in performance management meetings of 2 hours across the year. Now, instead of doing performance management on inset days, which to me would strike me as a lot more sensible, you've got the time to actually think and be a bit more strategic. They were kind of dotted just across our normal time. Now, we all know that 2 hours is not enough to set targets, review targets, close off targets, etc., particularly if you're a head of department and you've got to do not only your own, but a whole series of other people's. That wasn't included. So when I put in my corrections, the total came to approximately 30 hours over and above the 1265. That equated to 4.5 days on our school day. The result was, after a lot of toing and froing, that some meetings were done away with to cut it down a bit, but we also ended up with another 4 days holiday. So a bit dodgy really, because it meant we were then in school for 179 days teaching rather than the 190. Don't think the local authority was terribly happy about it. In fact, I know they weren't. But it's an academy chain. They do what they want, really. But at least it balanced for us that we had the right number of hours.
Thank you so very much, Karen. And there we've got a really clear example of the need to look closely at the calculation and of the things that stand out most obviously there, the need to be really attentive to the fact that if your school day finishes at 3:30, but you're required to attend a meeting 4:15, those 45 minutes appear anywhere, do anything else, you must remain in your workplace in order to do that. Karen, thank you so much. I'm going to go to Paul next, as promised. Paul, I know you're under time constraints tonight, but thank you so much for joining us.
Sorry, be really quick. Look, one thing I will say is we've had a direct time budget in our school for a number of years, and it's one reason why is because we have the NEU work-life balance model policy. And I would urge every single person to download it, every single rep to download it and get it negotiated within your school as a matter of urgency. That will benefit you a great deal.
Thank you very much, Paul. Pablo, thank you for joining the call. We knew that he could only be with us for a few moments, but my goodness, what a fabulous piece of advice. There is an NEU policy on work-life balance that he has ensured has been adopted in the place where he works. Isn't that fantastic? So we're going to go from Pablo to Katie. Now, Katie, I know you work for Academy Enterprise Trust, but I don't know where you're based. I don't know anything about the school you're in. If you could just give us a little bit of context and then tell us your story about directed time and negotiating with management in order to achieve a good settlement for your NEU members, the whole staff team. Katie.
Hi, I'm based at Ryde Academy on the Isle of Wight, and we're a large secondary school. We've always had the directed time budget in place. We have a quite a good relationship with the head. So it was more talking about some of the things that we've put in practice. So rather than looking to go up to the full 1265, when we do the budget we try and come in a few hours under, and that just means if there's anything that's like out of context or something like that, that you can plan it into the year later on. So this year obviously there's been a lot of unexplained things, so in that case occasionally we've actually taken things out of the calendar in order to make the hours work really well. So the budget comes through to us probably in the next few weeks. We go through, we do check all the maths because you know, sometimes mistakes are made, and then also we have a full calendar that goes through it, and we go right the way through the calendar, and we're looking for those things like too many meetings in 1 week, just checking that everything balances. Once that's done, when staff come back in September, they also get a paper copy of that calendar. So although we have an electronic version, there is a version that we can go back to, so if things change we can always check that those hours add up. And it's just kind of having that good practice in place so everybody knows where they are. And then what we find is that in the workplace, if any dispute does come up about things, if it's not in the budget and it's not being covered there, then it's a voluntary act, and it's up to teachers whether they get involved in it or not. And just having it really clear, actually it helps management as well. It's not just for staff, it genuinely works well. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Katie. And you're absolutely right. What we're actually talking about is something that benefits teachers in terms of their own workload, but also just gives real clarity to the smooth operation of the school, both for teaching staff, but also by being really careful about support staff working hours as well. Katie, thank you so very much indeed. And I'm going to go across to Edward Squire. Now, Ed, all I know about you is that you're with United Learning, one of the very big academy chains in the country. I don't know where you're based, but once again, it'd be great to hear your story. And then Eman, I'll come to you next afterwards, if I may. Thank you. Ed.
Thanks very much. I'm the health and safety representative at Sheffield Park Academy, which, as Robin says, is part of United Learning, which is, I think, the second biggest multi-academy trust chain in the country. And actually, our academy doesn't have the commitment to the 1265 directed time total. So a bit by accident, I came across a commitment at least to a 30 hours per week total in my role as head of department, and then took that and was later able to use it to get one of our really, really big wins of the year. So effectively, we had a new behaviour policy launched last October, which I believe is the 7th in the 3.5 years that I've worked here. And that behaviour policy had a policy that every time a member of staff had a student removed from their classroom, that member of staff then had to attend a same-day meeting with the head of behaviour that day to go and have a chat with them and explain why that student was then removed from their classroom. Our concerns were, A, that it kind of ends up punishing teachers. It makes them less likely to press for support if they have to give up their time at the end of the day. It can be undermining for teachers to have to sort of feel they have to justify themselves on that. In addition to that, because I work in an inner city school in a deeply deprived area, that meant that there were huge queues of teachers at the end of every day waiting to have these meetings, which quite often went past directed time. We took feeling, probably in the time that I've been rep, I've only been a rep for just over a year. We had quite a weak union presence here for a while before that. But in the time that I basically went, and I got besieged by members coming to me and saying, this is not okay. And we fed that back to the head in a union meeting. We were meeting fortnightly because of COVID. And the head said that he would look into it and there'll be an announcement about it in briefing on Monday. So we assumed, okay, that's great. In briefing on Monday, he'll let us know that these things have been cancelled. And then on Monday's briefing, he said he'd had some really positive feedback about these after school meetings and they would be continuing. And I thought to myself, I cannot think where that positive feedback came from. But we thought, okay, he's clearly not listening to us enough in the current format. So we launched a survey. I'm not sort of talking about balloting for official action, literally just a free account survey monkey survey where we asked questions about the after school meetings. And one of them was on directed time. Do you think staff should have to attend after school meetings for their directed time, which technically ends at 4 o'clock? And 60% said no. And then should staff have to attend these meetings if they go after directed time until 5 o'clock? 100% of members said no. And so we fed back the results from that survey. And in addition, we also fed back comments, and individual comments that people left were actually really powerful on that survey to the head. Some were positive, and it promoted a really positive conversation with the head. And eventually those meetings, it was concluded they would be optional for teachers to go and discuss these things further if that's something that students wanted. And I don't think if we had taken that collective action that we would have got that result. So actually, yeah, one thing probably that I'm most proud of that we've achieved so far this year is as a collective membership. We've had another big win on screen time using a similar tactic, but overall, it does go to show it seems daunting, it can be quite scary, but it was something that was a survey link away, and it's something that I'd feel more confident on in the future. And I'd encourage anyone who's in a similar situation to do the same thing, particularly if you're in an academy chain that hasn't got the commitment to 1265.
Thank you so very much, Ed. And it's not just academy chains, some academy chains that don't have the 1265. We know that's also true in independent school contexts and various other employment contexts. But what you've shown us is that actually with collective action in a spirit of cooperation where you draw together the views of members, sometimes as a rep, it can be a little bit daunting. You're absolutely right, Ed. And you kind of feel out there on your own, particularly when people are moaning at you a lot as a rep. And one of the really important things to do is to make sure that you've got their support, you've got authentic stories, you've got either survey data or their words so that you can take that through. Really, really helpful example, Ed. Thank you so very much. And we're going to go to Eman next, who's in Harlow, the other side of Essex from me. I could put out a shout for the best county in the country, but I'd get in trouble for that, so I won't. So we'll go right across to Harlow. Thank you, Eman.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a brief on my story. So I actually joined the NEU very late in 2020. I joined the NEU on a Monday, became the workplace rep on a Tuesday, and was thrown into action on the Wednesday. The school had closed for a non-COVID related incident, and we received an email just before 7 a.m. asking us to go online and plan a whole day for online lessons. Now, obviously, we're talking about workload here as well as directed time, and that is just far too much workload to put on staff first thing in the morning. With the help of my district secretary, Murray, who is absolutely amazing, and the NEU advice line, I managed to get a lot of information, make a call to the head teacher, and later on, which was also followed up with an email from Murray, later on received an email to say that there would be no online lessons while the school was closed. And I think that's very important, because if we think workload, that is just far too much workload. You know, as educators, we know we want the best for our students, but getting a load of teachers to plan online lessons just before 7 a.m., is that really going to produce the best from our teachers? It obviously is not. So that was the first, that's how I was thrown into action with regards to workload. With the help of the escalation app, which is an absolutely fantastic feature that the NEU introduced last year, managed to get the concerns of members. And I think that's important because members don't usually like to talk up in meetings. So it's a good way for them to get their concerns to me in a discreet way. I took the concerns, done my research using the NEU website, and it has so much information. And that's when I came across the magic number of 1265. Took the NEU calculator, worked it out. Now, we had moved to a temporary COVID timetable, and something didn't sit right with me because some teachers were starting at 8 o'clock in the morning and finishing at 4:30 to take in the staggered start, the extra year 11 time. And once I'd done my calculations, it worked out that we were all going to be 45 hours over, which with 58 members was working out as over 100 hours. So that's a lot of extra hours for no pay and added workload. It was just far too much. Took the concerns, met with the members, also took the concerns to the head teacher, who I emailed the calculator to as well, and sat down, worked it out, and she could see that we were shortchanged the 15 hours in the first term, and if we'd carried on, it wouldn't be sustainable. So we have moved away now from the temporary timetable, and we've gone to a new timetable, which means we will gain back the 15 hours that we've put in extra in term one, and we will obviously not be over the 1265. And it's obviously something that I will be taking forward for the planning for next year. Now, other things that have helped obviously with these meetings, which helps with workload, we've managed to get PPAs on timetables. We've managed to make sure that break duties are not being done between 12 and 2, make sure that lunch duties are not being done by teaching staff, and also COVID cover, because that's very important, because we need to remember that members have membership with NEU or with any union, and it's to them, it's like a home insurance. They have it just in case, and they don't actually realize their rights. And these are rights. This is the law. Having PPA on your registers, not doing the extra workload, not doing break duties between, these are things that are their rights. So I myself was asked to do COVID cover, and I politely declined. I sent an email explaining my stance, and it was covered by the head teacher, who came and saw me and said she would do the cover. And I, she's not an NEU member, so I didn't really say anything. I let her do the cover. But, staff need to know their rights. And what's really nice now is that leadership, when they address staff, they address them by saying, with union input, this is what we are doing for the future. And I think that's lovely to see that we are now working together to get the best for our staff, especially for their well-being. I'm going to end on something like I ended on Monday, and that is a comment that a wise man once said, and that is, if you see something that's not right, unjust, inappropriate, don't complain about it, do something about it. And those words are yours, Robin. And I really do believe in them, because we have to move away from this complaining culture. And this is why this launch is so important, because we put the calculator to the head teachers, we put the directed time, we put our requirements in order to make sure that workload, because you want the staff to be at their best. And that's why the NEU calculator is here to stay at my school. The work-life balance that Paul was talking about earlier, policy, that is here to stay. And I'm going to be working closely with leadership to ensure that the well-being of our staff and our members is looked after. We're not going to wait for a disaster to happen. We're going to prevent it.
Thank you so very much indeed. I mean, it's the energy that you bring through that commitment to the well-being of your members, but knowing that if you get that right, what you're actually also doing is hugely benefiting the pupils and the families that your school is serving. And that's something that sometimes gets missed in the middle of all this, that actually a fresh, energized, teaching workforce and support staff workforce that's not perpetually under the burden of workload can actually do a better job. Hugely important messages. Thank you so much. I'm going to bring Kevin and Mary back onto the screen. I'm going to ask the various teacher contributors if you would just stay available. The first couple of questions I'm going to pass to Mary and Kevin, and then depending on time, we may be able to take some more questions to feed out to others to comment as well. So I'm going to go to Mary first. Mary, I haven't got you on video at the moment, but I'm going to start reading the questions. I'm sure you'll appear as I do that, and you have. Fabulous. So first of all, I've got a question. It's a kind of fundamental question from Marta, who simply says, what's this 1265 everyone is talking about? That's a great question, because why would you know? And then there's a follow-on question, which is a really lovely kind of specific example. Comes from Peter Collins. Thank you, Peter. We have an issue with an excessive amount of meetings within school, and meetings being added last minute with no option to not attend, even if you've got childcare responsibilities. Do we have the ability to inform staff that they can refuse to attend them if it exceeds the, and I think you were going to go on, Peter, to say if it exceeds the time allowance of the 1265. Your question is masked on my screen. So Mary, if you could take those two, and then I'll come to Kevin with a follow-up question.
So that is a great question. What is this 1265 that everyone's talking about? Just the sort of question that I like. So I'm going to answer it really clearly. The 1265 hours, 1,265 hours, is the maximum amount of time that teachers can be directed by their head teacher to be at work and available for work. So directed time must cover the time you spend teaching your class or your classes, planning, preparation and assessment time, supervision before and after teaching sessions and at breaks, if you're doing break supervision, but not at lunch times, because teachers cannot be required to supervise at lunchtime. It must cover any cover you do of other teachers' lessons, parents' evenings, after school meetings, in-service training and CPD, and any other activity where teachers are directed to do this work and which it requires their professional skills. The full list of directed time is in sections 51 and 52 of the School Teachers Pay and Conditions document. But basically, it's the work which you are directed to do where you have to be present at parents' evenings, teachings, duties at break time, meetings, those activities. What is not directed time is the work that you do to prepare your teaching materials, to write your lesson plans or marking. Now, we know that this also adds a huge amount of workload, but the School Teachers Pay and Conditions document says that that time should be reasonable, and that the leadership can't direct you for how long you should spend preparing your lessons. They can't direct you for how long you should spend marking work or doing assessments. So that is work that you do for your professional practice, but it should be a reasonable amount of time. So if you're working every night until 10:30, and then working 2 hours before you begin school, and then working a whole day every weekend on planning, preparation and assessment, then I don't think that's reasonable. And you have a right to raise that workload with your head teacher. But directed time is the time where the head can say you have to be here because you have to teach that class, or you have to attend that meeting, or you have to do that inset, or you have to do that CPD, or you have to go and cover that class. It's time which can be counted and directed. So the maximum is 1265. So that's, Marta, is the 1265 hours that everyone's talking about. And Peter's question, you have an excessive amount of meetings within school and meetings being added last minute. That is not reasonable. It is not reasonable for staff with childcare responsibilities to be told at the last minute they have to attend a meeting. Meetings should be allocated and timetabled in a directed time calendar, and those should be the meetings that you go to. If you're being required to go to meetings which are arranged at the last minute, you will be doing meetings which are over and above the directed time. But more than that, it's not the action of a reasonable employer to be taking at your time when you should be collecting your children, or you should be choosing to do other things at the last minute. It's not good management. It's not effective leadership. So if that's happening, then what I would advise you to do is actually have a union meeting, go through why this is above directed time, but also go through why this is just not the right way to treat people. They don't know whether they will be able to leave to do what else they need to do outside school because they don't know if that emergency meeting will be taking place. That is not to say that in an emergency, in a real emergency, when there's something really going off, then it is reasonable to say, if you can you stay for a quick meeting about this particular issue? But that should be absolutely the exception. It should be an emergency meeting. Peter, if you're having emergency meetings weekly, if they're excessive, then those are not emergencies. Those are a testimony of bad leadership and bad management.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. And one of the things to tease out as we build our understanding about this is that you've got your contact time as a teacher. So that's when you might be in the class actually teaching or doing tutor time. You've got duties. You've then got meetings after school and parents' evenings. And it's adding all of that up together that gives you your directed time calculation, your total. And absolutely, Mary, agreeing with you about the fact that meetings should be scheduled. And there's no reason why you shouldn't have your meeting scheduled before the year starts for the whole year. Absolutely no reason why it shouldn't be laid out. And then if any of those meetings aren't necessary, cancel them. It's that way round, not the other way round. I'm going to go to Kevin. We've got a question from John Hayes. And John is keen to see us making more noise, I think, about this particular issue. He says, do we have a way to identify and publicise the good practice in schools where workload is well managed? If reps could use actual examples of how schools manage it, well, it could be very powerful. I know, Kevin, you'll point him straight away to some of the things that we can refer to. Thank you, Kevin.
No, and I know John. He's one of our fantastic leadership members of the NEU, as is Robin, and they run their schools in the ways that are designed to try and minimise excessive workload and to have engagement with the staff. And I think it is really important that we talk about positive examples as well as negative cases where we've sorted issues out. It's obviously really important if you've got a problem in your school to be able to say to the head, actually, there's a better way of doing this. And another head down the road is doing that in a better way. So I think the question John is asking is really important. Robin has given some examples on this call of his practice as a school leader. And we talked earlier on about one of the innovations that we've had during COVID is the reps WhatsApp groups. Most branches have these and very many reps are in those groups. So that's, a group of 60 or so reps, potentially, maybe it's 30 in an area who are capable of sharing problems they've got in their schools, but they can use those WhatsApp groups to share positive stories as well. And we really know that this matters. If we are pressing for directed time calendars to exist, and in some schools they don't exist, then being able to say in a school down the road, there is a calendar, the head's very happy to do that. That's a real boost to us. So sharing those positive stories really matters. We're going to do them through the WhatsApp groups, and we intend to collect them in positive stories and then feed them back out again. Let me just say that during the pandemic, our union, the National Education Union, we've got loads of school leaders in our union, and we want to be the union for all educators, teachers, support staff and school leaders. But we have worked really well with ASCL and NAHT during the pandemic, raising questions of school safety. And we're talking with them about these questions as well. You should expect positive reactions from head teachers when you raise these things. That's the right way for head teachers to be. So go in politely but assertively, expecting positive reactions, share the positive stories. If you're having a problem, go back to your members, talk to your branch secretary about it.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. And I'm going to move towards the end of the hour that we had planned together with a few more questions. Just going to remind everybody that we're going to be sending out resources to support you in doing these actions that we've described. There's going to be an email letter as well sent to every employer. So it won't just come to, the information won't just come to you as members, but it will also come to your head teacher and or the trust that you're working for, whatever setup you've got, the employer that you've got. So the NEU is going to send out that information. I'm also going to do a little plug for a book. And this is a fabulous book that was written a few years ago by Nancy Ellis. Nancy is a policy lead at the NEU, and she wrote a book called Managing Teacher Workload. And the chapters in it absolutely chime with the things that we've been hearing today. So it may be time to rip up that book, spread the chapters out and get it online in some format to help people who are on this call. I'm going to take the next two questions. And these are going to be part of our kind of wrap up. So I think what I'll do, if I may, is I will pass the questions to Mary. I will then ask any of the reps on the call who wish to speak to raise their hand with some final words or some further comment. And then Kevin, if you could just close the session for us. So Mary, the two questions that I'm going to take, one comes from Bushra Ahmed, and she says, can the school dictate what we do during our PPA time? My school has an SLT member that joins every PPA, and they want us to talk through the planning with them. This takes up more than an hour and sometimes leaves us with very little time for us to prepare any resources. Is this acceptable? So there's one, I can see the reactions of the reps on the screen, but Mary, you get the chance to give the answer to that one. And then a question from Chelsea Higginson. Really straightforward, but it also just signals a whole series of important issues. Hi, she says, are we required to work until 4:30 each day? So she's specifying a very particular time, presumably to be on site and undertaking work. So Mary, if you could just comment on those, and then any of the reps who've joined us, if you want to add something, just raise your hand so that I can clearly see. Raise your electronic hand for me. Mary, please.
So Chelsea, if you're required to work until 4:30 each day, if that's a requirement, then that if you finish your lessons at 3:15, then that 1 hour 15 minutes 5 days a week has to be added to your directed time. If it's added to your directed time, that's why you need a calculator. I think you will find that you're working way over your directed hours. So no, you can't be required to stay and work. You need a union meeting in your school, and you need that basic contractual information to be made very clear to your head. And Bushra, can the school dictate what we're doing our PPA time? Absolutely not. PPA time was designed, and I was involved in those discussions within the DFE at governmental level, and we had long discussions with the leadership unions who were trying very hard to say that they should have some say in how teachers use their PPA time, and they were not allowed to do so. It is very clear the PPA time is your time for planning, preparation and assessment. You should not be having a member of the senior management team using that time to discuss your planning with you. If they want to do that, they can arrange a meeting to discuss your planning with you separate to your PPA time, but that meeting forms part of your directed hours. It is absolutely not the place for senior management to be in your PPA. They should stay out of there because that is your professional planning, preparation and assessment time. It is yours, not anybody else's.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. And interesting to see that Chelsea has just come back to us in the chat. It's only visible to the panelists. And she has said that she has asked for a calendar and that the head teacher has said no, and that it's a matter of direction for the head teacher. Well, Chelsea, the answer to that is have a union meeting in your school and go back again to the head teacher. And if the head teacher still refuses, that's when you get in touch with your local branch officers and they will support you in taking that forward. Okay, and I'm taking Chelsea's just as an example. So as I say, we're just wrapping up. I did say any of the reps who wanted to give a contribution to raise their hand. Iman, you got your hand up, please do come in.
Yeah, I was just gonna say really quickly, if the school follows the school teachers' paying conditions, you have your you have your facts there. You take that to the head teacher. It's not a please may I have 1,265 hours. It is my right to have 1,265 hours. It's my right to have my PPAs. It's my right to not do break duty during these times. This is not this is not a negotiation. This is your right. And you take that to the head teacher. You talk to your members, because like I've said, members don't realize what their rights are. Make sure members are aware of their rights as well, and go to the head teacher with the backing of your members, and you should be able to get that answered.
Thank you so very much. And Ed, you want to follow on, and I will take that. We're just slightly over in time. Thank you to everybody who has joined the call. Thank you for all the participation within the call. I think it clearly is an issue that is resonating with you tonight. People are getting good value out of the contribution. So we are just going to stretch our time a little over. Clearly, anybody who has heard what they need to, have a good evening and slip away. But we'll just take Ed and then we'll take Kevin to finish. Ed, thank you.
So I was just inspired by Iman's finishing with a quote there at the end of her story earlier. And I think there's one that I try and live by is you should never be afraid of what you're doing when it is right. And even when my heart is beating a tattoo on the inside of my chest when I'm talking to people a lot more senior to me, I do try and stick by that. So yeah, I'll just keep that one. And thank you, Iman, for sharing your story with me.
Superb. Thank you, Ed. And yeah, sometimes it will feel a little uncomfortable, but if what you're doing is right, you should not be ashamed of it, and you shouldn't hold back from doing it. Thank you so very much, Ed. I'm going to go to Kevin to wrap up for us. Thank you, Kevin.
Well, thanks very much. And I want to thank all the reps that have been on this call. You have all been absolutely fantastic and inspiring. And I want to say to members on the call, our union is strong and it's getting stronger. You did great things as educators during COVID, and the union working with you helped you be safer than you would have been otherwise. We want to take that strength of the union and we want to make your working lives better. And we want to do that not just for you, but for the children that you teach. Tired, exhausted teachers are not the best teachers. Exhausted support staff cannot do their job properly. What Mary said at the beginning, the international comparisons support us. Teachers in other countries are less exhausted. They're less stressed. They have more control over their work. We want to make our education system more like those places. We want to use the newfound strength of the union to do it. If you're on this call and you don't have a rep in your workplace, then please, like Iman, volunteer to become a rep in your workplace. Just search NEU become rep. You'll find it easily. I'm sure it'll be put in the chat in just a second. So volunteer to become a rep. We're getting all of the questions that you're asking on this call, and we've got answers to all of them. You know, the questions that part-timers are asking about how the 1265 applies to them. We can't answer all of them here, but your rep can answer them. Our advice line can answer them. Your branch secretary can answer them. You can do a meeting like this at local level and share experiences about what's happening in your school. Together, we can make a difference. So please stick with the union. Volunteer to become a rep and make sure that you're raising this question this term about the directed time calendar, the 1265 hours. Together, we can make a difference for our members and for the children that they educate. Thank you very much for being on this call tonight.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you to everyone who has contributed. And I'm going to finish picking up one comment that's come through on the chat from Kirsten Castro, who's just said to all of us on the panel, I'm off to get my calculator out. I think that's a great thing to do. Have a good evening, everybody, and we are there to support you as the National Education Union. Good evening.